Hi there, this is Ali Reza Farahnakian, Ali Farahnakian, or Big Al when I was smaller, Al when I got bigger, Leafer in college, which is just saying Ali Farahnakian fast, Papa Bear in Chicago to some friends, Dee Dee to my daughters. I'm sitting here at 462 West Franklin Street in beautiful Chapel Hill, North Carolina, recording the intro for the first Improv Your Life podcast. We found out July of 2017 that there was a space available in Chapel Hill that was a comedy space, and the building was a beautiful little building, and the town of Chapel Hill didn't have a performance art space, and the oldest university didn't have a comedy theater, and we'd been doing it for over 15 years in New York City. Well, someone in the basement of the office, the Hive, as I was walking through, Alan, mentioned that the space was available. And I thought to myself, wow, that's too bad. That town's going to lose the only comedy space it has. And he said, you should look into it. And I thought, yeah, sure, I'll look into it first thing Monday morning, on account of we got a lot on our plate in New York City. And the people in the office already work so hard and they're stretched so thin that I didn't want to undertake something else like this because I knew this would be a massive project. But later that night, my wife pulled me aside and she said to me, I think you really should look into this. And I thought, why? And she said, well, you're from North Carolina. You're an alumnus of the University of North Carolina. Maybe you can help these people. Well, the old launch sequence had been activated. We got the number of the landlord, we connected, hit it off. Next thing you know, we were signing a lease and coming on down south. And Will Neville came down to help me, and here we are. And it's been quite a journey. And no hero's journey, and not to say I'm a hero, I'm far from a hero, is fluid and without challenges and difficulties. Our issues are all first world woes. We really don't have third world woes. We've got first world woes down here. And we're trying to get it open, doing the best we can, learning how it works down here. And they say, be bold, and mighty forces will come to your aid. Well, after I signed the lease, they did an interview with me in the News and Observer. Shortly thereafter, I got an email from a gentleman named Bryan Tucker, class of 93 UNC, co-head writer of Saturday Night Live. And his email read, Hi, Ali. I got your email from a mutual UNC friend, John Haber. We've met before, but I'm not sure we've talked extensively. I saw an article in the News and Observer that you're opening a new pit theater on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. I'm writing to see what I could do to lend support. I went to UNC and graduated in '93. My sketch and improv group played coffee houses and music clubs around town, but there were no improv theaters. Later, we went on to tour for 5 years, where we played some of the best college snack bars in the country. I would have loved to have a resource like The Pit when I was a student. Now I'm a TV writer. I'm in my 13th season at Saturday Night Live, and 3rd as co-head writer. I've been down to Chapel Hill several times to speak at the journalism school and alumni functions. I did a class and monologues at a few shows down there. So, if there's anything I can do to lend support for the theater, please let me know. In the past, I've made appearances and given a few donations to help build new projects. Best of luck on the new venture. Bryan Tucker. Wow, I was blown away. This guy reached out to me. Well, it came the fall, and he reached out to us again and said, I'm going to be in town if you want to do something. We were nowhere near being open, but we were already doing shows and probably shouldn't have been, which we later found out. But that was all right, because we got this one in under the wire. Bryan came the night before the Duke Carolina game. We sat down in the space, and we had a conversation and recorded this interview. And a young man afterwards came up to me who was an undergrad at UNC, and he said to me, that was the best night of my life. Well, it was a cool night for me too, to have a conversation with a fellow Carolina alum, and just a great guy, great human being, funny, generous, kind, and it was an amazing night. And I have to remember that with all the first world woes we have going on, little moments like that never would have happened had we not said yes and to this project, this objective. We're doing what we can, trying to fight the good fight to get this beautiful building open and sailing again as a performance art space for the town of Chapel Hill and the surrounding towns. And hopefully someday it'll be open again, and people will have a place to come, a lighthouse in the perfect storm, an oasis in the desert where like-minded folks can gather and commiserate and collaborate and conversate and have a place they can know they can go. But this was a wonderful night. I haven't listened to the podcast since we recorded it, but Will Papora has sat me down here this beautiful Saturday morning on the last day of March in 2018, forcing me to record this intro, to get out of my own way, to not let perfection be the enemy of good, and just try to do a good podcast. All right, good day to you, and enjoy this podcast. We're introducing.
Sure.
But we're here now, and thank you for coming out on this rainy evening. I mean, I can't tell you, to me, fellow Carolina alum, but 13 years at Saturday Night Live, head writer. To me, this is like a rare opportunity. Nothing like this existed when I went to Carolina, so thank you for reaching out.
Sure, that's a big reason I thought it would be fun, because nothing existed like this when I went to Carolina. So.
Yeah, kind of reason I'm here too, because there wasn't a place really when we were here dedicated to just getting up on stage.
Yep.
And performing and doing stuff like that. And so we'll talk tonight about, kind of your, growing up, how comedy kind of affected you, how at what point you knew I think I want to do this, and then the things that interest me too are the bifurcation points, the places where it's I met this person and then saw this show, but you started out in Virginia, and there's where you where your roots and your perspective started to get formed in a way.
Yeah. I grew up outside of Richmond, Virginia, in kind of a rural area called Chesterfield County. Always liked comedy, went to an open mic night in Richmond when I was in high school, and that was my first taste of it. Probably like a lot of people here, made videos of my friends and stuff, and that was, but it didn't really occur to me that could be something you do for a living until about junior or senior year of college.
Because, for me growing up, it just didn't seem like this was something you could actually do. It was just something you did as a hobby.
Yeah, totally. And I didn't know anybody who was involved in, who made a living being a comedian. And even when I was here, we would make money around town, but I guess I still thought, oh, okay, I'm going to do that for a little while, and then I'll go off and have a real job in journalism, which was my major.
Mm-hmm. And being from Virginia, how did you choose Carolina as, just as your school?
I just really liked the vibe of it. Again, I even back then I thought, maybe I'll be a journalist. I was into, politics. I was into current events. I had done stuff on the radio in high school. And I actually got into UVA and met my roommate, but then got off the wait list at Carolina and was one of the last people to get in. Went and they put me in Craig dormitory. I don't know. But, me and my roommate were the only people in our suite that were under the age of 23, and their first language was English. So that was a little tough. But it turned out great, because there were a lot of other freshmen who were kind of bewildered in Craig, and we all clustered together, and some of those people are still my best friends today.
Because getting in out of state at Carolina is a big deal.
Yeah, it's probably more of a big deal now, but yeah, it still was a little harder back then.
Because for me, in-state was like a one-page application.
Right.
No essay and just.
Yeah, my wife is from Durham, and she was like, "Yeah, I think I'll go," and then got in November, and then that was that.
So let's talk about Carolina and you being here, and how you got into comedy here, and where you did stuff around here, and the group that you formed.
Again, I was super interested in comedy. I immediately joined the student television station, where I participated in a sketch show where a lot of like-minded people also were part of that. And there I met friends who just, we loved stand-up, we loved improv, we did sketch together for the student television show. And because we liked it so much, we thought, let's form a show together because I had 10 to 15 minutes of kind of mediocre stand-up, and so did my other friends, and we couldn't put a show together just with one of us, so like we said, let's do like 5 of us, and so we put it together and we wrote some sketches, and our first show was in the basement of a dormitory, and our friends came and stuff, but we kind of had the I guess that passion that we were kind of we just wanted to go out and do it, whether we were good or bad, and slowly we were pretty bad at first, and slowly we kind of learned a little by little to get better, and luckily our friends came to the show and always supported us, and eventually we started playing around town. Like you said, there weren't many places to play, so we played at coffee shops and bookstores, and like even the Cat's Cradle, and dorm room talent shows and stuff like that. So.
And you guys were rehearsing once a week, or was this like a?
Yeah, we go and rehearse in one of our friends' apartments, or whatever. Our discipline was the student television show where we would meet every week and have a meeting about stuff.
But that's a lot for some folks in college to put together a sketch group, and then all of a sudden you're doing shows, and that takes a lot of initiative.
Yeah, we absolutely had the fire and the passion to do it. And I think all of us, that was our way to bring attention to ourselves, and meet girls, and all this other ulterior motive things that we wanted to do. We were super into it, and put a lot of our time and effort into it. The student television show, we would have to deliver it on Sunday, so I would stay up when I was the producer of it by junior and senior. I'd stay up till 3 a.m. on Saturday night, like editing it and stuff, and wouldn't really have, not often, every other week I would. So sometimes I would not have a social life, but I was just super into it.
But you guys were editing video content even back then?
Yeah, on 3/4-inch tape. These big machines like this, and we kind of, and then like you'd be at like 2:30 in the morning, and we'd just go, and then you'd be fucked. And you're like, sorry, I can't do anything.
So you did that all through Carolina,
and
then came time where it's time to graduate.
Yep. By that time, we were a little bit of a local hit, where people knew our names and they would come to see us, and we were making decent money, which for a college student it was maybe you get like $200 to split, which was still great, And so again, we took the initiative. We did a big show on campus in the Great Hall in Chapel Hill, and videotaped it with 3 cameras, and then edited it all together, and then sent it out to a bunch of agents, just hoping we could get a bite. And we got a couple agents called us back, and we signed with this agent out of New York, who mostly booked colleges, and kind of it slowly took off from there. But there was about 1.5 years, 2 years where we were, we played at a racquetball court in the opening of a health club, where we played behind the glass. We played at a bar in Burlington where we got bottles thrown at us. That was that show. We would play wherever, because we just wanted to play. And they never had comedy there. They sometimes had music. They had a little stage. And it was the Game 4 of the World Series, and the Atlanta Braves were playing. And we came into the bar, and it was booming. The TVs were booming, and everyone was there watching. And this was a bar that served 40 ounces, which was already a red flag. A lady came up, and she said, "Okay, we're going to turn off the World Series." And everybody went, "Bow! Bow!" We naively thought, you know what, like a lot of performers do, it's all right, we'll win them over. It'll be all right. And so how we thought that, what we thought the solution to do was come up and just be loud as hell and kind of win them over with noise. And one of the guys in the group went up and just went, "Hey, everybody!" And the feedback, they weren't ready for that in the mic. The feedback went all over it. Everybody went, "Ah!" And they hated us. So we tried to do about 10 to 15 minutes of like stand up, and it was like, we need a place. It was like, fuck yeah. Of like, improv stuff. And then finally, we couldn't really hear ourselves up on stage because we were getting booed so much. So we went off into the parking lot, and one of the guys in the group who knew some country songs went on stage and played country songs while they turned the World Series back on mute, so that we could at least fulfill our contract. And we got paid, I think it was $60, and there were 5 of us. And so we went to Bojangles, and got Bojangles and like a 12-pack of Milwaukee's Best, and we just drank it in the parking lot. So that was the glamour of those. And but by the time, it took about a year and a half of shows, not always as bad as that, but shows here and there. And then we started playing on the NACA circuit, which is like the colleges, mostly medium and small colleges who want to bring, entertainment to their campus. And we ended up playing like 500 shows in 4 years. We were really good at colleges because we were college age and we were very high energy, and we were the kind of act that 18 to 22-year-olds love. And we gained some notoriety in that way, and then we also played clubs. We played the Improv in LA and the Cellar in New York and Carolines, and we would drive from Chapel Hill up to New York City, play 3 club shows, and then drive back all night down back to Chapel Hill, and we did that probably at least 6 or 7 times. So,
but again, like the initiative to make VHS tapes, to send them to agents in New York City, right? There were VHS tapes. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
just
right.
to do that, and then to NACA is not an easy thing to like get into. And
Yeah.
to have the wherewithal to go, let's do NACA.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
You just found out about it, or
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is due to one guy in our group who went to business school and had a business mind. Even when we were 19 years old, he made business cards and he made stationery with our stuff on it. So when we went to like a coffee shop, we could give them a videotape and stuff, and we looked very professional. And so much of that was just the appearance. Later, we actually had credits on our resume, and it was easier to get. But early on, we just kind of presented ourselves very professionally.
I guess you need that because there's so many people out there who are groups or part of a group or doing their own thing, and it just kind of doesn't quite go to the next thing. But I guess it takes that level of, that business acumen of like packaging what you are.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it was very fortunate that we had a guy in our group whose first thought about our group was, where are we going to play? What are we going to do next? Where all our thoughts were, how is this funny? What can we do that's funny? How can we make people laugh? He was a lot more, the truth is he thought like a manager, even though he was a performer as well.
But you guys toured around the country for 3 years.
5 years.
5 years after that.
Yeah.
With the group doing shows at colleges.
And clubs, yeah.
And clubs, and making a living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We made a living for 3 out of those 5 years. Full-time living. A full-time living,
The last 3.
The last 3, luckily, yeah.
I guess that's. But so the first 2 you got jobs.
Yeah, we were waiters and stuff like
in
that.
Chapel Hill area.
Yeah.
Where'd you work?
I worked at a place called Daryl's.
Daryl's?
Yeah. They recently burned it to the ground as part of a fire drill. Yeah.
I was a dishwasher at Crook's Corner.
Oh yeah.
And then moved up to Salatron after 3 days.
All right.
And then Hams, I was a dishwasher too and a line cook.
Yeah, I washed dishes in high school, so and cooked.
And so you do that, the 5 years of touring, but you decide you're going to go to New York, and the rest of them don't. And this is what year where you decide I'm going to New York? You get out of Carolina in '93.
Yeah, this is '97.
97.
So that was tough. I was lucky in that my brother and a lot of my Carolina friends already lived in New York. I roomed with my brother, so I had friendly faces there when I went up there. That being said, that first 2 years where I went from living a pretty good life down here, just touring and being young and, hanging out with my friends and playing basketball in the day and doing shows at night, then to go to New York City and basically be poor and not know what I was doing or where I was going. Those first 2 years were probably the hardest years of my life, in that I had already had some success and then suddenly I had none of that, and no one really knew who I was, or I kind of thought that all that experience. Well, I'll say this in 2 ways. I thought that all that that my resume would suddenly open doors for me, and it really didn't. But learned, what I know in hindsight now, is that playing 500 shows and all those, or 400 shows or whatever it was in those years, was taking steps to just being good along the way. Like if I didn't have that under my belt, I would not have stayed in New York or done nearly as well. Because when I would get up on stage, I was immediately, pretty good, because the other people I was performing with were usually people who had just started.
Right. So you had already, like, you were seasoned somewhat, you had a stage presence.
Yeah.
You knew who you were, you had a lot of combat experience on stage. So
that's true.
But I mean, 97 in New York, still at that time, the alt comedy movement hasn't really started.
That's right.
UCB
Clubs
hasn't arrived.
Yeah.
Right.
I really hit that sweet spot in New York where clubs were a huge thing in the 80s and 90s, and clubs were starting to not be as big. But the smaller rooms, that now the biggest places to play in New York are like these, like, like a theater in Brooklyn, or even a bar. Those are the cool places. But those places were just kind of starting to pop up. There was Luna Lounge, which I played a few times. But mostly it was you trying to get in at a club with people who'd already been there for sometimes 10, 15 years.
And so it wasn't as easy to do open mics or mics back then.
There were open mics, but they were at a coffee shop with 8 people. The truth is that that's still the case in New York. There's never been a great open mic, but yeah, that's what I was doing as much of those as I could.
And then you're at that point, you're still writing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems like there's also a certain level of, like, just being driven and having your own accountability to make sure you're writing throughout the years.
Absolutely. My role in this sketch group of 5 people, like, I was the writer. I wasn't the only writer, but I was kind of the main writer. And the other guys were, one thought like a businessman. The other guys were really good performers. And I knew that I was not as good a performer as them, but I was as good or better writer than them. So I moved up to New York with the intention of being a writer, and I didn't know how to do that. The only thing I knew how to do was, like, get up on stage and let people see, that I was funny, or at least try to. Being on SNL now, like, if you just send a packet in of your writing cold, it's just no one's going to read it, or it's mostly going to be dismissed. So the way I thought I would do it is, get people to know my name, know who I was, and then kind of segue into being a writer there. And most writers for comedy variety shows are former performers. So.
Mm-hmm. So you knew, like, it would at least get you stage time, it'd get you out there.
Yeah.
And was there jobs in that 2 years, or you were?
Yeah, I used to, like, tour around and play comedy clubs. I was like the middle at a bigger club, and sometimes it'd be the headliner at a smaller club. And I played colleges and stuff, but again, it was very modest living. Yeah.
And then, what was, like, the first gigs where you started getting? Was faxing for Letterman? Was that the first gig?
Yeah.
Because there used to be, that you could be a faxer back then, but
that's right.
You'd still have to get approved. Like SNL has something like that too.
Yeah.
But how did you get approved to be able to fax Dave Letterman jokes?
So that agent that my sketch group had, which was really kind of a college booking agent, not really one of the big agents like CAA or something. But one of the people who worked at that agency was a former comedian, and she knew the head monologue writer of Letterman. And he called her up one day. They had just let go a lot of their faxers, and they said, "Do you know anyone funny?" And she recommended me, and so I sent them, like, a day later, I sent them like 15 jokes, and they read them, and they said, "This is very funny, but it's not in Dave's voice. Can you try another time?" And I said, "Okay," and I ended up watching Letterman, like, every night for 3 weeks and kind of writing down his jokes and thinking about them, and until I kind of figured it out a little bit more of what his voice was, and I wrote down a bunch of jokes that I thought were in Letterman's voice, and I faxed them in at maybe 3 o'clock, and at like 5 o'clock I got a call from the guy, and he said, we like these, as a matter of fact, we're going to use one on the show tonight." So I was like, "Oh, great." And they paid me $100 per joke, and then from then on I was on the fax list, which was one of like 20 guys who would fax in every day. and guys and ladies who would fax in every day. And
But back then it was literally faxing them in.
It was literally faxing them in. Yeah.
And I mean, but to see something you wrote being said by Dave Letterman for the first time, I mean, that must be.
That was pretty awesome.
Quite a night.
Yeah. I brought in my roommates and we all watched. It was like, there it is, and it went over fine. Not great. Right. It was like, all right.
Right.
I remember the key for like me and watching Letterman was he came out and what kind of clicked in my brain of like, oh, this is how Letterman is, was he did a joke which was, there's a new report that scientists are now have just cloned a pig, and you know what that means? More pigs. And that was the joke, and it wasn't really clever or witty, or it was just kind of like a just a little jump, and I was like, okay, that's what I need to do, is write it kind of quick and staccato, and kind of just make little, observations. And so once I started thinking in his voice that way, it helped.
That's one thing I guess I learned, or someone told me early on, is to always try to write in someone's voice that you're writing for. You might not get Sam Jackson, but there's nothing wrong with writing in his voice if that's the character.
Right, that's right.
And I think that's where people kind of fall short, where it's man one, woman one.
Right.
And then it's like, well, who's man one, who's woman one? And then to instill in that, like, and so you watched Letterman, and so you started getting things on Letterman.
Yeah.
The faxing, and from that, then the Chris Rock.
Right. So then after faxing into Letterman, I started sending in, writing packets, which is, lots of shows do this, Conan, The Daily Show, SNL. You write a sample of ideas and jokes and sketches of what might be on that show, and you send it in to them, and if you're very fortunate, they'll call you in for an interview. To give you an idea, at least of the SNL ratio, last year we had 380 some packets, and we ended up hiring 4 writers, and only one of them off packets. The other 3 people auditioned, so pretty tough. Chris Rock, I'm sure, was a lot fewer writers, but I sent in a packet, and luckily it got read, and they called me, and I got hired. So.
SNL, I mean, when I was there, it's like the packet is like what they used to say is 2 sketches will get you looked at, 4 could get you hired.
Yeah.
Roughly still the same?
Yeah.
2 sketches, could 2 sketches get you hired? Or would 2 sketches could get you hired?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd have to, I've been reading as head writer, and then before that I was a supervising writer. I've been reading packets for the last 8 years. It's tough because so many of them are pretty good, at least pretty good. This is a competent sketch writer. The hard part is when the hardest thing to find is something where you read it, like 1 or 2 sketches, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is such an interesting original voice. We have a writer on our staff named Julio Torres, who he's from El Salvador. He wrote things on our show like Wells for Boys and the Papyrus sketch, and a few other things. But where there's a sketch where just there's a monologue of a weird sink, and he's like, what he writes, like no one else can write. He has his own very original voice, and that's kind of what you look for in a packet. The truth is, most people who get hired on SNL are people who already have been strongly recommended by writers or cast there. It's very, very hard to just write a packet that nobody knows who you are, and you like it so much out of the 350 other packets you write. You're like, oh, this one.
So I don't want to jump around too much, but I mean, the Chris Rock show, you get that from the agents, the packet.
Yeah.
That packet is another probably 4 sketches or so.
Yeah, 4 or 5. Well, actually, Chris Rock wasn't. I didn't write full sketches. I just wrote ideas in paragraphs. You could maybe do this, maybe do this, and then I wrote like little bullet points of like what would be funny, little punchlines.
Because that would be more like a Conan packet or a Letterman, where it's like, here's 8 to 12 like desk pieces or remotes in paragraph form with some jokes that I might put in
Daily
there.
Show does that too.
Right. But Daily Show has a bit of a structure of what they want.
Right.
Yeah, of like, so Chris Rock at that time, it's kind of a heyday for him. You
know,
Chris Rock as a stand-up, he's already respected and accomplished.
Yeah.
He's got this show, The Chris Rock Show. He's pushing boundaries. You know, there's a lot of talented people.
Yep. There's a great writing staff. One of my favorite jobs. I didn't understand how good I had it because it was my first job. Since then, I went on to other jobs, but that job was just. Chris learned a lot from Saturday Night Live, especially what not to do. Saturday Night Live is a very competitive environment naturally. This was a lot more friendly. Everybody kind of got along. You were all part of one thing together. He would take us to his movie premieres, and he took us to see stand-ups, and we were kind of a social group as well as a writing group, and people like Wanda Sykes and Ali Leroy and Jeff Stilson and Steve O'Donnell, great writers in that group.
Yeah.
Louis C.K.
Right. And how many 8 to 12 writers on that staff?
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And so that's going for a while. It's going great. It's a great experience.
Yeah, 2 seasons for me.
2 seasons.
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad. I mean, because when you get a gig, it's 13 weeks.
Right.
So when you get your first writing gig, it's like, congratulations, you climbed the mountain, you got 13 weeks.
Yep.
And maybe at week 10 or 11, they tell you we're going to re-up for another 13.
Yep.
And that can go on for years, right?
Yep,
right?
That's true.
So it's 13 weeks to 13 weeks once you get that, the goal has been accomplished. So, you're still having to prove yourself.
Yep, that's true.
But 2 years for a TV show, especially of a high quality, that's a huge.
Yeah, and I came in the 3rd season, so I was there for season 3 and 4. It had already been going on for 2 seasons.
And then you were saying that once when it was done, you found out like the week of or something. Is that
right?
Right.
So we weren't sure if Chris was going to come back for the show, do another season, and he told us during the staff photo. On the very last day. So we all lined up. We were ready to take the photo, and he was like, I'm sorry to tell you, I'm not coming back. So after today, no one has a job. Before the photo, and then everyone was like, cheese. So that was tough. I mean, we didn't blame Chris. He had been talking about this for a little while. There were lots of rumors. Are we coming back? Are we not? It wasn't some huge surprise. But we were disappointed in his decision. So after that, I didn't have a job for about 6 or 7 months. And I naively thought that because I had this great job and I got a much better agent out of that job, that suddenly doors would open for me. And that wasn't the case. I sat on my ass playing video games for a lot of that. And I had just gotten married, and my wife had a pretty good job, and she would come home, and I'd be like on the couch in my underwear, and she'd be like, have you been playing video games all day? And I'd be, no, I just took a shower, and I horribly lie my way out of it, but not really out of it.
But it's tough. I mean, you have something like that, and it's done. Then there's a certain kind of low-level situational depression.
Yeah, totally.
It sets in. We're like, oh, Jesus, now what?
Yeah. No, it's always, you're never quite there.
Right.
I started to feel a saturation point when I worked on Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, I worked on Chris Rock, then Mad TV, then Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn. And Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn was comedians from New York coming in. It was like a panel show. It was on after The Daily Show, before Colbert came on, before Colbert started. But there were comedians from New York and all over that came in, and I would work with those comedians and help them with their jokes. And suddenly, well, not suddenly, but gradually, I got a little bit of a reputation of like, okay, I knew people, and people knew me as a person they could rely on. And that was where I started to feel pretty good about things. Because a lot of these other comedians would go off and have shows, Greg Giraldo or, Patrice O'Neill or Jim Norton or,
So from that, then Chappelle, the Tough Crowd was between Chris Rock, right?
That's right.
And
Chris Rock, Mad TV.
Right, Mad TV.
Then Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn. And while I was on Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, I was also performing, and I knew a guy named Neil Brennan, who was also performing, who started Chappelle's show with Dave Chappelle. And I knew Dave Chappelle just a little bit from around town. But I was friends with Neil. And Neil knew that I had written for the Chris Rock show. And he said, we're starting a show. Can you send us some ideas? And so even in the pilot, I send them some ideas, which they ended up using some of those ideas in the first season, not in the pilot. But I was sending them freelance ideas in that whole first season while Tough Crowd was going on. They said that they wanted me to come over there, but Comedy Central wanted me to stay at Tough Crowd. So you can't poach from your own network shows. And then Tough Crowd got canceled, and then after that I went over to Chappelle full time in the first part of the second season. I had written, which is still one of the top sketches on my resume, I had written the race draft sketch. That was such a big hit. Yes, thank you. Thank you. And that was such a big hit that, they were like, we should have him full time. So I went over there, and that was a very different environment. It was basically Dave and Neil doing they ran the show creatively, whatever. And then there was just me in a different room. And I would go and I would sit with them and hang out and pitch stuff to them. But they were doing 80% of the comedy there, and then there was me and then a couple other people who were freelancing stuff. So I was saying yesterday, I only got maybe, out of those 2.5 seasons, I only got maybe 6 or 7 sketches on that show. But luckily they were notable ones.
Plus it's the Chappelle show. I mean,
that's right. Yeah, it was cool to be at Chris Rock when he was at his height. To be at Chappelle when he was at his height, to start SNL. The people I started with were Kristen Wiig, Bill Hader, Jason Sudeikis, and Andy Samberg and the Lonely Island guys. I really was, all those were stars aligning, lucky times to be, that I was at these places.
And like something like the race draft, where, inside baseball type thing, it comes to you in a moment, or? I
mean, I can tell you exactly. Yeah. I was writing on Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn, and one of the comedians, black comedian Keith Robinson, was like, and Jason Kidd sucks for the New Jersey Nets. All these white basketball players suck. And Colin was like, white, he's black, and he's like, no, he's half white, he's half black, and Colin was like, why do we have to take Jason Kidd? You take Jason Kidd. So I was like, oh, what we should do is have a draft of, if people are mixed race, we should say, okay, now you're this and now you're this. So that's where it came from.
And so you have the idea, the nugget, but ideas are a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
But then you take that thing and you begin, how soon do you start working on that sketch? In your writing process, do you start off with like paragraphs of what the idea is first?
My SNL writing process, or in general?
In general, yeah. Whether it's sketch writing or in general, because a couple times you said, it started out with a paragraph.
Yeah, it depends. SNL, I really do have a very definite process, and that is by Monday or Tuesday, I want to get 1 or 2 ideas I really like. Okay, I'm going to do these ideas. And if it's with a cast member, I bring them in and we sit and we talk for between an hour and 2 hours, sometimes less, sometimes only 30 minutes. And we just talk about the idea, what would be what would be funny, what would be a punchline, what are some lines we could say, whatever. And I just write it down as we go. And we just talk through it. And then that person it's a cast member, or sometimes it's another writer. Then that person leaves, and then I just write the sketch. And then I give the sketch to the person I wrote it with and say, here, do you have any thoughts, suggestions, whatever. And that to me so far has been the most efficient way.
And that hammering out that first draft by yourself, I mean, that's the, as people say, writing without art is sitting down to write. That's hard. And just hammering out that shoddy first draft, where you're like, I got to do this. That's the, McKay was always great at that. He just was like, have an idea, and he would just blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Where some people would overthink it, and, you don't really have to stay up all night.
And my first year, because I was only allowed to turn in one sketch,
Right.
I would go home by sometimes midnight.
When I tell people that as a new writer, you're only allowed to have one sketch.
One sketch that has your name on it first, which
right.
means it's your idea. You can help cast members or other writers with sketches, but
right. So Chappelle, jumping back just to the end of that, it's ending, but it's an amazing show, and you see it basically it's coming to an end. That cred of having Chappelle, does that finally give you like the cred that allows you to like doors are opening?
Yes, definitely, because that show didn't really have a writing staff. It had Neil and Dave, and then some people knew about me. But nonetheless, my name was attached to that when people would call up, when it went away and people would call up Neil. Dave wasn't available. But when people would call up Neil and say, who worked on this, he would give my name. And then suddenly I was very much, doors were open. And Neil was friends with Seth Meyers, who had just been promoted to writing supervisor at SNL and was trying to get, kind of his people in. And so recommended me. And yeah, that's how I got SNL.
And then so you submitted a packet through your agent.
I did. Remember when I said earlier that there's the recommended pile and there's the others? I definitely was in the recommended pile with Chappelle. And I was of the mind, and maybe, again, this was naive, because I had other people who wanted me to come write on their shows, that I was like, it's okay. I don't really need it. I worked hard on the sketch packet. It's not like I just phoned it in. But it might have helped me, because I was very zen about it. I was like, if I get it, it's okay. If not, it's all right. There was not at all that yearning of like, I need to get SNL.
So you put the packet, this is fall of what year when you get there as your first year writer?
2005.
2005 you get there. Other writers hired with you or no?
Yeah, like I said, the cast members hired that year. It was, in my opinion, one of the best SNL classes. And again, I'll take myself out of it. But the cast members who were hired that year were Kristen Wiig, Bill Hader, Andy Samberg, Jason Sudeikis. So he was moved from cast to writer. And then the writers hired that year were me, Colin Jost, and the two guys from The Lonely Island, Jorma Taccone and Akiva Schaffer. And so out of all those, 8 people hired, I'm the least successful person of that. Everyone else was a movie star or a director or is starring on Weekend Update with Michael Che.
That is quite a class, though.
Yeah.
But Sudeikis, we used to work together at Second City at IO, but he used to say when I went from a writer to a performer, I took a $35,000 pay cut.
Yeah, but an investment in himself.
That's right.
Yeah, it's so much better to be a performer in terms of like having a career for yourself.
So 2005, you get there. I mean, what's it like? As a starting out writer.
Yeah, it's the last year of Tina Fey. It's a big transition year. It's the last years for Tina Fey, Chris Parnell, Horatio Sands, Rachel Dratch, and Finesse Mitchell. So yeah, I was kind of just learning from all of them, and then figuring things out. SNL is a high learning curve. Even if you're a really good writer, it's a different kind of show, and it takes a little while to figure it out.
I remember Bobby Carlock told me once, it took him 18 episodes to get his first sketch on.
Oh wow!
And then Higgins told me, he's like, if you get one thing on all year, we'll be happy.
Wow.
Just relax and just get to know what it takes. I mean, McKay was like, it takes like almost a year to figure out what this show is.
Yeah.
And what they're looking for and how to write for that, Studio 8H. And,
yeah.
So it was like, there was a certain amount of like, there's plenty of other people here because you're running with wolves.
Yeah.
And they're all good writers, and performers now get that if you want to get stuff on, you've got to be a writer-performer.
Yeah.
So how long before you get your first thing on?
I mean, I really hit the ground running there. I pitched an idea that Lorne liked so much that he wanted me to write it, and it got on the show, on my very first show.
Wow.
That was a blessing and a curse in that kind of people viewed me as like, oh my gosh, watch out. And then inevitably I was not as good as that. I was just pretty good, So I had like a period where I was like, oh, I'm not getting stuff on the show anymore. So it took me a while to kind of find my own voice. And I said this yesterday when we talked, but what kind of really helped me was partnering with Kenan Thompson, because Kenan also he was just a great performer who didn't really have a place there at SNL. People didn't really know who he was. The audience didn't really know who he was yet. He'd gotten on stuff here and there. But when he and I started writing together, we both brought each other up. And so that partnership has lasted to this day. And, that was mutually beneficial, but especially for me because I finally found someone who I I could write stuff for that always would perform it well.
Mm-hmm. Like, what up with that? How does, that's like, seems one of those ideas that almost comes from this, this other world of like, where does,
Yeah.
the singing, a singing.
Right. That was also a time, 2009, when I was at a very sweet spot on the show where I knew I wasn't getting fired, but I didn't have any of the responsibility of being head writer or, being in Lorne's office all the time or having to think about what does this cold open mean and what will the press write about it and stuff. I was just writing fun sketches and fucking around. But I had the full confidence of the show. So that was my morale was my favorite time in the show. And so we would just, like you said, we would just write whatever we thought was fun. Keenan came up that week and he said, what about an idea where the show starts and the person singing the theme song can't just stop singing the theme song? It's like, okay. And we thought about that for a while, and then we turned it into a talk show, and then kind of came up with this song, and then, it slowly, I remember the thing that kind of turned it was we were writing it, and then we just wanted to make it bigger, and I forgot who the first one was, but who was it? I forgot who the first host was, but it was, that's right. It was a guy in a white suit with a cane who did a monologue, and it was like, ladies and gentlemen, White Pete. And then he came out and did a monologue. It was that moment of when we said, ladies and gentlemen, let's bring on this crazy character. We kind of a light bulb clicked on, and we were like, we can do whatever the hell we want, in this song. We can just put whatever silly thing, we want. And once we kind of, that sunk in, we were like, oh, great. That's what this sketch is, and that's what we'll have fun with it.
Right. So. But I mean, you've been there 13 years. It's got to be up there in terms of the history of the show of how long people have stayed there.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's, they're not easy hallways and waters to navigate. I mean, you got to that's a skill in and of itself, how to navigate that world of SNL.
Yeah.
Tina used to say she was great at school. She was great at doing homework and getting along with folks. And that was one of the reasons that she was prepared for SNL was because it was just a lot of doing your homework and going along to get along and knowing people. And,
yeah. I mean, it's a very competitive place just by the nature of it. Every week, at least, about 40 sketches get written. They get read out loud at a big table on Wednesday. Some get laughs, some don't. And then it gets narrowed down. And then about 11 to 12 get picked for dress rehearsal. And then after dress rehearsal, 2 or 3 of those get cut. So ultimately, between 8 and 10 sketches end up out of the 40. And that's just the nature of it. And so it's it's just competitive. And so that naturally makes people a little competitive with each other. And so it's helpful there to be supportive, to be open, to not immediately take a stance of okay, I'm doing this and you're doing that, and I don't really, I'm not part of your world, and to know that rule of improv, that kind of yes and we're all in this together, and to kind of keep that in your head is helpful there.
And going from a writer to head writer, that experience, how they talk to you about it, they approach you, or you approach them. How does that that's because there's only a limited number of head writers.
Yeah.
At SNL that's been there since the beginning. It's a big deal.
Yeah, you basically get called into Lorne's office and he tells you. That's kind of what it is. I had been supervising writer for 3 years, so I was at that point I got to at least go into the meetings and see where decisions were made and what sketch got picked and what didn't and why, and so kind of the curtain had been lifted a little bit for me, at least in that part. And then just I was having a good year. Seth Meyers was leaving. That was the biggest thing, really. And he came in and sat down, and there were the producers there, and they said, "We think we want you as head writer." I said, "Okay." That was
And then he's
very low key about everything.
Right.
He kind of says it in the middle of another story, and you kind of just say, "Did you just
okay be head writer?"
Yeah. Right.
Him again. So,
right, exactly. Yeah.
But so I mean, the head writing job for people who are listening or watching, you oversee the writing table, right? On Thursdays,
Yeah.
right?
There's
And
two writing
There's
tables.
two writing tables. When I
Yeah.
was there, Tina ran one and Higgins ran the other.
Yeah.
And so you're overseeing the writing table, the rewrite day.
Yeah.
Each one taking about an hour per sketch to go through it, or
Often,
longer?
often more.
Yeah.
The sketches that get picked for the show get divided up in half, and we sit, and then the writing staff gets divided up in half, and we sit around as a group and read it out loud, and then talk about it and say what can be changed, what can be improved, and we make cuts and changes. Often it'll be like Lauren will give a note of like, the host didn't do well in this, but we want to put him or her in this way, and we'll have to change it a certain way. It's depending. Some sketches are incredibly tight and well written, and they're just there right away. And then some, you just have to keep going.
And then you're liaising with the hosts and the writers, and then you're taking it all the way to basically the end.
Yeah. I'll give you an example of this past week. Maybe you guys saw the sketch in Colonial Times where it's the Patriots versus... So I wrote that one with Streeter Seidel, who's a very funny writer. And we wrote it, Streeter's from Connecticut, and we wrote it to make fun of New England Patriots fans. And we wrote it just with cast. But then on Thursday, it was like, who does a really funny kind of a-hole Boston is Rachel Dratch. And so someone had suggested her. And so then Thursday night, we said, let's put Rachel Dratch in it if she's around. We called her. She was available. And then someone said, it's the Eagles, and Tina's from Philadelphia, and she does a funny Philadelphia accent. And I'll bet if Rachel Dratch was in it, then maybe Tina would be in it. So we called her up at Thursday night at about 10 or 11 o'clock. She said, okay, I'm in. I rewrote, Streeter got the flu. I rewrote, which is something he had to leave. I rewrote the sketch that night. I emailed it to Tina. She gave me a couple notes about like a Philly accent. I emailed it to Rachel on Friday. We rehearsed it on Friday at about 5. Then rewrote it again that night, and then they came in and did a costume rehearsal of it Saturday afternoon. We did it at dress Saturday night, and it didn't change too much.
It was great. I mean,
thanks. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like that's one of those where it's like smart and funny.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That was in terms of something I was involved with, one of the better ones I felt about this season.
Mm-hmm. And like it seemed like a while ago. It was funny first to some degree, and then if it did something smart, great.
Right.
But now it almost seems like there seems to be a little bit of a shift there.
Right. I think a big reason. Well, I'll just back up. What I'm seeing more and more in comedy in general, but also a little bit on SNL, is just that often things have a social message underneath, and that's always been the case with SNL. That we've had social messages, but I feel like because of the internet, which often there's a lot of social message comedy, a lot of the newer writers, the younger writers have come up with that. So often what you see is sometimes a sketch that's a little bit about like, I want to make this point, and that's kind of where they start, rather than me, I'm a little bit more old school of like, what would be funny, and I think both are valid. I'm not saying, often the ones that have a social point resonate even more because, when you put it out there, especially in 2018, people are so passionate about these different issues that they share it with their friends, and kind of they have a much longer tail on the internet than just something that's silly. Ideally, what we would like is something that has a point and is also very funny. So year 13, this will be your 13th year. Plans for yourself in terms of like, staying with the show and stuff like that, or because a lot of folks go on to sitcoms and movies. Yeah. I'm definitely on the tail end. I've been, like I said, 13 years. I'm 45 years old. You stay up all night. On Friday night and Saturday, I stay up between 1 and 3 in the morning. It's tough after a while. So that's taking a little bit of a toll on me. And also, it's a show that thrives on new voices and young energy. And, at some point, you kind of have to let those rise. And so I'm trying to figure it out. I've sold movie scripts and pilot scripts, but nothing that's ever turned into, a real show or movie. And done lots of projects. I started a sports comedy, I guess what they call vertical, called The Kicker, which has 14 employees and is doing pretty well. If you watch the Super Bowl, Jimmy Fallon was standing on the Pepsi sign and introduced Justin Timberlake at halftime. The Kicker, the company that I helped start, got to produce that, which was really cool. So I have other projects, but in terms of what exactly I'm going to do, I don't know.
I mean, what would you tell young folks? Because when you started, or when I started, there weren't as many people doing this.
Yeah.
Like I actually wrote a letter to Lorne, and he had someone call me back.
Wow, that's great.
And so then that's how I got my first packet submitted.
Yeah.
But now there's 380 packets.
Yeah.
Coming from both, recommended and just.
Yep.
What do you tell someone who's interested in doing sketch comedy and likes it, and how do I break through this thing now?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly no definite path. There's no silver bullet. The bad news is that, like you said, so many more people are doing it. When you and I moved to New York City, there was no UCB theater. With your help, there was. And the Pit and the Magnet. Improv and sketch is a thing that young people do now, whereas when we were coming up, there wasn't that. And so there are more opportunities to do it, but because of that, there's so many more people doing it, and it's so much harder to get noticed. Also, with that being said, there's 300 original television shows out there now, and there didn't used to be. There's digital comedy. There's a lot more opportunity to write and get your voice out there. The hard part is standing out and having some staying power and making a career. And I don't quite know how to, I'm in a position where I don't know quite what I would do in that. I would say to people just starting out, like, the best thing to do is to find a place to do it, to give yourself deadlines and opportunities and places and ways to make yourself do it, and just to continue to do it. That's the first and easiest thing to do. Take a class, come up here and do stuff regularly. Do it to the point where you can once someone gives you an opportunity to pay you for it, that you'll know what you're doing. I'd said earlier, those college shows that we had played, I moved to New York, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I was like, well, why did I do all those shows when no one cares? And the truth is that all those shows were little steps towards making me much better, so that when I got to New York and people were, actually interested in me, that I had all that experience under my belt. And one reason, when you started this theater, I reached out to you, is I would have been so glad to have a theater like this, to come and have a regular place to do comedy. We had to just figure it out, and luckily we did. But it's just so nice to get that there's opportunities where you can go and actually perform and get experience, and not in a somewhat low stakes environment where you can kind of take chances until you get to a point where you're pretty good.
What else? I guess maybe some Q&A from the audience. Is that cool? Me wrap up some questions for...
Sure.
Any questions you guys have? Yes.
So, because we talked a lot about just the internet and everything like that. I've been in Los Angeles for 11 years now. I went out there in 2006. And I came out here about 2 years ago, and still in LA, you're driving to casting. Here on the East Coast, which blew my mind, is you're submitting yourself through links and just straight to the casting director.
Uh-huh.
My question, I guess, is where do you find yourself based out of? And do you see it behooving people to actually move to these hubs, such as Los Angeles or New York or even Atlanta now?
Yeah.
Do you see these as being viable options, or do you see people like in rural areas or smaller areas, metropolitan areas, being able to actually have an opportunity to accomplish some of the things that you have?
It's a good question. I think, I hate to say it, the answer is ultimately you probably have to move somewhere if you really want a full good career at it. That being said, I've seen plenty of people. There are guys I met down in Texas who do a thing called Rooster Teeth, who are out of Austin. They are very successful. They have their own office. They've done 2 movies. They were friends in college, and they're like a sketch group, and they produce their own digital media and have their own stuff. They have their own pocket where they're very successful, and they do what they want. And I do think that that's possible. But they're playing to their audience that they've cultivated digitally. LA producers have worked with them to help produce their movies, but they haven't like transcended to the point where everybody knows who they are. What I would tell people, especially starting out, and it doesn't seem like you're starting out, is do your best to use places like this and whatever to kind of try things, fail at things, get better, and then go out and do stuff. I mean, it sounded like you went just straight from Chapel Hill to Chicago, and I guess where your seasoning ground was a lot of those classes and stuff like that. And you can certainly do that too, but it's easier to figure out things here a little bit before you move.
And I think LA is the place where that's what they do.
Yeah.
Then there's New York. Then there's Chicago. I think we were talking about this via email. Maybe is like I wanted to maybe make it so like Austin was not the only other place.
Yes.
Like
right.
Chapel Hill could eventually become a place where it's like I got a lot of stage time, took classes, and now I'm ready to go to Chicago, New York, or LA.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, it depends on just where would you like to live.
Yeah.
Because Chicago's an amazing town.
Yeah.
But even there, eventually you gotta go to New York or LA. And even in New York, eventually it feels like you gotta go to LA.
Yeah, there are places. I mean, I've been lucky to be in New York for the better part of 20 years, except for Mad TV. But yeah, there are most of my friends who started off in comedy with me who got good jobs moved to Los Angeles.
All right. I mean, I think.
Yeah, sure.
I can't even. This having done this journey here, coming to do this, has been up and down on a roller coaster, and it's been quite an odyssey. But nights like tonight, where someone like you is gracious enough to come share your gift and talk to folks. I mean, it's like, to me, it's mind like Head Writer Saturday Night Live, coming back here. I mean, it's just, thank you for taking the time, for coming in early,
thanks,
and being an advocate of this, and I just
thank you. I'll also reiterate that it's so great to see that you have continued. You have this theater here, and it's such a great resource, and a big reason I came down was to support it, but also because you've got you've had such a successful theater up in New York, and you have your own, great background. And so, I really appreciate you coming down and starting this. And so what I can do to support, I'm very glad to do.
Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you, everybody.